For those who don't know Keir, he's the Chief Digital Officer at the NFSA. And just to read from his bio, he's mentor in the Creative Australia's CEO Digital Monitoring Program, co-founder of the bi-monthly Cultural Data Salon for Sydney cultural workers. His book, co-authored with Dr. Suse Anderson, is The Digital Future of Museums, published in 2020. Has a background in art, strategy and consulting, has collaborated on award-winning projects that blend digital and culture across the globe. In 2018, he was named in Fast Company's 100 Most Creative People in Business for his work. So he has a PhD in new media and speaks and writes frequently on the intersection of digital and the arts, in particular as the role of digital as an agent for organisational change. So Keir is speaking to us on giving an overview of NFSA research projects today. So Keir, over to you, please.
Ray, you've got the wrong person. I don't think I recognise all of those accolades, so it's almost a bit weird here.
That's what your bio
having them read out. I'm not sure who in my team wrote that bio, but it's very flattering. And also just to acknowledge my colleague Jackie Orman, who very much instrumental in encouraging me to join the organisation, in which I'm thriving. I really enjoy it at the NFSA. It's a fantastic time to be here with kind of resources around the work we do and investment in the work we do, and the availability and the interest of the current government is certainly the best I've seen in years. So yeah, it's really enjoying my time here. What I was going to do, Ray, if you're and everyone, if you're kind of comfortable with it, was basically take you on a little bit of a journey on how we're approaching research at the moment. I'm going to share some slides. It'll just make it easy to keep track. And then I'll put into the chat a link to our recently published research strategy. So you've got it as a kind of thing you can then refer to afterwards. And I've got a kind of obliquely where to from here slide at the end, which will act as a kind of prompt for discussion. And then I'm happy to kind of field any questions and we can kind of back and forward as makes sense. Does that sound all right as a kind of rhythm, Ray? Right, okay. So let me just click the share button. Does that all look good, Ray?
That's good. That's good. Yep.
Nice. So research, as you all know, is sort of instrumental and emblematic of the work of the NFSA. It kind of only exists in dialogue with understanding the changing nature of the formats of our kind of producers that we work with, we collect from, our kind of donor community, people that, deliver through kind of legal deposit. We are always doing research. There's kind of generations of research that has led to publishing, that has led to books that are still reference points kind of across Asia Pacific and the world. We put out papers on things as diverse as sort of chemicals and digitization and conservation and mechanics. And literally like this week, even possibly today, we have a couple of our conservation team in Mumbai giving an expert kind of masterclass on the conservation of film in a kind of, very wet and maybe potentially compromised environments. So the work that the NFSA does, because we need to respond to the changing nature of audiovisual production, we've really grown our capacity in, say, video games, both the accessioning and the emulation and the kind of management of those things. You can't do that without research. So when I say, that we've written a research strategy, you could easily ask, well, hasn't that been kind of bread and butter of the institution for generations? And it has. And so what we wanted to do was, instead of letting it be a kind of, I guess, an emergent property, we wanted to be quite intentional. So we did a little bit of work at the back end of last year, which I'm going to take you through. So what was the process? What it meant to reestablish or kind of establish a kind of set of principles and practices we could lean on. So firstly, what we did was audit all current or ongoing activity or planned activity around the NFSA that related to existing or potential research partnerships, which I don't think anyone, maybe other than Jackie, knew just how many we're involved in. I'm going to go through a list in a minute. It's quite a lot that we're already involved in. We looked at some of the published material from staff, things like conference summaries and YouTube videos and articles and stuff across the website, and just try to bring it into kind of an understanding of even what was in front of us. After that, we did an investigation of peer institutions. So what are the sorts of storytelling online that peer institutions are doing around research, but also what are the programs they offer or collaborations that they're part of? And then we set about we had 2 sessions. The first one within the exec was after we'd kind of gathered information from across the organization, was to really look at, are these the right research collaborations for us? And are there ones that are on the cards but aren't aligned with what we're trying to achieve? Or are there kind of areas of density or quality that we wanted to lean into? So that the first part was sort of like review the audit and made a set of recommendations internally about what we're going to invest in and what we're going to maybe lean out from. And then we wrote together in a second session, right at the end of the beginning of this year, was a Research and Tertiary Partnership Strategy, which I'll put a link to in the chat after this. We've got a kind of PDF version, so you can return to it if you like. And we wrote a set of principles for machine learning and artificial intelligence that we published a couple of months ago. They've actually become really a kind of reference point. I'm starting to see the words we've used showing up in other people's documents, and a few of our peer institutions, places like the National Archive of Australia and the National Library of Australia, have asked for some of the documents behind the document to help them design their own. So those sorts of things are kind of working well. And then we published a new research hub on our website, which I'm going to show you, but also put a link to later. And then we set up a set of internal pages, so intranet web pages that articulate all of our active projects, but also if a member of staff, say a curator or a digital preservation person or myself, gets an inbound ask to be part of a research project or a research initiative or work with a researcher on a new piece of work, then we have a kind of process now in place around that, which I'll explain in a second. So this is our strategy. I don't think you can like click my screen, but I'll post a link in the chat so you can grab it after this. Is more to say, it's a kind of solid piece of work approved by the executive and the director, and is something that through which we can look at opportunities that emerge. So what were our goals? I think that's kind of the most important thing. And the bit I'll also say about research and partnerships is that there's the research that is our work every day. So there's the how to preserve a video game or how to work with nitrate as it dissolves. That's not captured in this. That's business as usual. There's the research our curators do around, makers and thinkers about how to contextualize our collection, how to put it in dialogue with, the world around it. That's not impacted by that. That is just the core business of the institution. These are the kind of external facing and collaborative projects that we may or may not want to invest in. So what would a partnership allow? Well, for us, it's about experimentation. So we have our core business, but where are the edges that we can explore? We want to improve knowledge about NFSA collections and individual collection items. I mean, we do that ourselves, but often the right person to kind of grow our understanding of the collection sometimes is someone who sits outside the institution, especially when working with First Nations communities. They're not inside the organization, but they can tell us things that we couldn't know ourselves. We want to identify solutions working with others around the most complex things and provide a testing ground for ideas. And so this is particular in the emerging born digital and complex digital object space where, there aren't fixed solutions in the kind of peer group and certainly inside our institution. So we're constantly looking for ways to collaborate on that. We want to expand our internal research capacity by bringing external research partnerships or commissioning where appropriate. I'll talk about that in a little bit too. We want to look into new areas of research around archival practice, whether that's publishing or externally or internally. That's still an area for us to judge. And then we want to build partnerships across private, public, and tertiary research sectors. So it's not just interested academics, where it makes sense. Maybe there's an AI something, or maybe there's a public, like when there's an academic working on something, or maybe it's, an institution, or maybe it's a non-academic institution at all who has information that our institution would benefit from, but we want to make that a reciprocal collaborative relationship. And so we want to be broad. At the moment, when you'll see the list, it's broadly kind of tertiary in our output at the moment. And so so that'll kind of make sense. It's sort of somewhat motherhood statement-y, but it's still important to kind of get it down in writing. And so then what are our priorities for what are the research projects we're going to go after? So obviously they have to align with the mission and organizational strategy. So tying back to our published strategic directions document, for example, and broadly the act and the mission. We want to position the NFSA as a forum for ideas, and that involves things like peer-reviewed publications and hosting and attending conferences. So we've really invested under Patrick and Jackie being much more available to the sector and to the community than we have in previous years. Partially that's, to kind of change of our resource environments, but we've gone from maybe 1 or 2 people presenting at a conference per year to last financial year, it was 11. So we've really kind of grown that outbound kind of presentation of our ideas. And now we're starting to send people to conferences. So we're sending a number of people to conferences this year. And actually the week before last, we hosted a conference at the NFSA around climate futures. It wasn't our conference, we were the host, but we were able to position ourselves within that. And then next month, in the middle of October this year, we're hosting the international conference for AI and libraries, archives, and museums. It's been around kind of 10 years or so, the first time it's left America or Europe. And so we're the first non-American, non-European host kind of in that program's history. And so people, we've sold out the ARC. So there's, 240 odd people coming from around Australia and around the world to be with us, to really reinforce this vision of a forum of ideas and for us to then publish on the back of that. We totally believe, and we're kind of committed to that, by having more kind of proactive research and by building tertiary partnerships and by doing this work out in the market of ideas, we're a more attractive place to work. So we're a more attractive place to partner too, but also it kind of grows our brand value and our image in the sector and amongst our peer group to be proactively putting research out into the world. It was one of the reasons I was interested in working here in the first place, for example. And that's part of that, bringing in new staff to the kind of forefront of their game and to have high quality candidates for our really critical intellectual roles, because we want people to be able to see that not only are they going to do the work, but we're going to celebrate the way they do the work and give them opportunities to get in front of their kind of peers and, inspirations and be able to present our stories and their stories, in the national and the global stage. So we had 2 people at the IPRES conference last week presenting. Again, I know that people in Mumbai right now. We have some people presenting in New Zealand on conservation at the ASA, the Australian Society of Archivists, have collaborated with the New Zealand Society of Archivists and are doing a big conference in Christchurch. So it's really about lifting that up. But then not only sending people out to tell their stories, our stories in conferences around the world, but then bringing that knowledge and that insight back into the institution. So if you go to something externally to do through a research collaboration or through a partnership, you then come back and you do a lunchtime lecture for staff so that all the staff are able to kind of see those insights and sharing those ideas. And what we're working towards for our website for next year is that then not only the people going and sharing our work across the world, coming back and sharing internally, but then they're also publishing on our site as well. So we can grow kind of like the technical and the philosophical resources for our partners and community. So it's a kind of holistic approach. And so what does that mean? Where do you find that stuff? So you can actually find on our website, and again, I'll chuck it in the chat in a little minute, this new research hub. It's only been up about a month. Even developing it was really fun because it showed just how many national and international networks we're part of. It showed the kind of history of doing really groundbreaking research, but also the kind of momentum we have and the almost ridiculous number of projects we're already part of, which allows us a little bit of, I guess, rigor about which ones we say yes to in the future. So what are the projects around? I might actually pause there for a sec, Ray, because that's kind of covered quite a bit of ground. Maybe I'll even go back to this. And just any questions of this, because I'm going to take you through some of the research projects we're actually working on at the moment.
Any questions from anyone? Anyone like to ask a question based on that slide?
Obviously, I'm happy to keep going.
Okay, keep going.
Yeah. Sometimes I bore even myself, my own voice, so it's a word of warning. So what are the things we're working on right now? So we have a linkage grant around media literacy, and actually Patrick, the director and CEO, is one of the partner investigators. And so it's all about media literacy, in particular kind of lifelong media literacy, not just for not just for young people, but for adults as well, which is incredibly critical time for strengthening democracy through understanding of media literacy when we come into periods of time when generative AI allows people to create misinformation, disinformation almost in real time and almost at a single prompt. So making Australians more media literate, I think, is a critical work of the institution. We're also working on things that are fun as well as critical. So ARC Linkage Research Grant and project on Comedy Country. And if I'm correct, Jackie, I'm pretty sure Steve Vizard is one of the kind of players in this. Yeah, I saw the nod. So that should be fun. A lot of that is actually about content availability, whereas the media literacy one is about designing the program in a way. We're also part of the Australian Video Game Development Project around artist game makers, game making and game makers, especially people who are maybe unseen and unheard in the history of Australian video game making. And actually one of the first research projects that we launched as part of the new research hub was the survey on video game preservation that we co-authored with the Strong and the BFI. So Strong in the US and the BFI in the UK. Phenomenal piece of work, really well picked up, covered in a lot of kind of mass media as well. Another one we're doing is a PhD program. So we have a set of PhD candidates. Actually, one of them I'm the what they call supervisor for, as someone who loves to supervise PhDs and just committed to it as a kind of critical moment in people's careers. Often it can often transform people's careers. So we've got one wrapping up, one mid and one about to start. So that's only halfway. There's still more. Warn yourselves. There's the Ray Edmondson Scholar, which is a partnership with, as you know, the George Eastman House Museum in New York, or GEM as I prefer, and it includes the travel that goes back and forth. So we had people from George Eastman with us recently, and previously our folk over there. We're also part of the CSU's Graduate Certificate in Audiovisual Archiving, and we're in the process of working with them on that kind of next version of that, the kind of post-2025 version of that. There's opportunities, we think, to kind of slightly modernize the course, but it's still popular and it's still important. So we definitely want to kind of maintain an investment in growing future AV archival specialists and professionals. We work with ANU, actually work with ANU on quite a few fronts. We're looking at all the different partnership points, and I think there's something like 11 points of contact. They're co-hosting parts of the Fantastic Futures Conference, for example, and producing a kind of interactive for it as well. We're also part of the ANU sound archiving course, so it's all around working with our School of Music. We've been doing that for some years now. And then there's the ANU restitution and the archive. And so that's more about specific contributions to that coursework every year than us co-designing it. So quite a few things already, as you can see there, that are underway, but they're ones that we know are critical to continue to invest in, and we audit new opportunities against them and don't simply say yes because we're offered. We want to make sure that we can bring value and bring value to the institution. So I'm going to stop the presentation and come back to it so that I can see you all. Where to from here is where I ended it. So what for us is really important is that there is a lens through which we can look at research opportunities that come inbound. They actually come inbound at the moment. I think part of what has happened of late is we've kind of grown in our visibility to the market and to our peers. So the kind of rate of interest in collaborating with us has really grown. In the current cycle around Centre of Excellence bids as funded by the Australian ARC, the Australian Research Commission, we're actually involved in 2 Centre of Excellence bids at the moment. Jackie and I are partner investigators in the proposal. So, it has to go through 2 gates. I think maybe something like 1 in 10 are successful. So it's, so a 10% chance we'll get it up. But we're part of a massive consortium bid around collections as national research infrastructure. And obviously we're really invested in collections as scale, as you can imagine, working with 3 universities, something like 12 institutions and a bunch of other kind of expert groups. It's a really big piece of work. And then we're also involved in, through the recently recruited head of digital preservation, who's now, her name's Jay Weatherburn, ex-Melbourne Uni. She's one of the proposed partner investigators on a Centre of Excellence bid related to born digital cultural heritage and the preservation of that, with a real focus on, the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, where almost like the machines that were used to make those experiences, whether they're interactive or otherwise, kind of don't exist anymore or are really hard to look after. So it's about emulation, and it's early video games, but early kind of interactives and media artworks. So it's a much smaller bid, like a fifth of the number of participants, let's say, and maybe more targeted and maybe more likely to be supported. But again, you can never tell with these things what the ARC is going to back. So that's the sort of tertiary partnerships world. But the other thing that we're doing that Patrick wanted me to make sure I highlighted is there's also just very specific kind of areas of interest that are adjacent to the collection or the institution and are not part of the day-to-day work of in particular, our kind of curatorial teams and our collection and preservation teams, is looking at some of our historic, given that we're at 40 years in Acton, this year, and given the collection next year will be kind of 90 years since its first inception, there's some like meaningful milestones. And so one of the things that Patrick has asked we do is work directly with a kind of professional researcher. An academic who's just finished a placement at University of Tasmania to help us kind of author a set of expressions of interest to do dedicated funded research projects with the NFSA in 2025. So we haven't landed on exactly what all of those are. Obviously, we have a real interest in the history of the institution and the history of the collection, but there's other things like, the kind of early years of cine sound. There's things related to kind of specific collection items that have emerged, after being disappeared for many years and have come to light. There's lots of work in the kind of foundational periods around the beginnings of kind of video game production in Australia, independent game production in Australia. So one of the things we're in the process of doing is almost doing the pre-work necessary to then be able to set out to design a set of expressions of interest around paid research for the institution, not just about the institution, but sort of almost like about the things the institution is invested in better understanding and then publishing around, beyond the work that we do every day around the collection. So that's kind of a work in progress. We don't have any announcements on that. Patrick is meeting. So the person we've selected to do that, that kind of first bit of work is an academic called Mike Jones, ex-ANU, currently UTAS. And on the back end of that, we'll kind of have a clearer steer on which of the projects we're going to green light from the kind of 10 or so that staff are interested in. We could probably pick, maybe 4 or 5 that we can fund and turn into something. But we didn't want to pick them out until we'd done the pre-work to understand like what's the literature space that we'd that is available, what are the kind of assets inside the institution that are available, what's the staff availability to help that person, has someone already written that book and we just need to cite it and we don't need to write it ourselves. So that's the kind of next phase of work for us is kind of balancing those 3 zones of activity that I've now covered today. So the first zone is research is fundamental to how we work, and we want to keep doing it. The second zone is partnerships are critical to us extending what's possible and extending our capacity. So we're doing a lot, like 10, but we want to do a few more, and we want them to be designed through the lens of our policies and strategies. And third, we want standalone opportunities to focus on specific questions or parts of history or parts of audiovisual storytelling in Australia. And we want to like put money and time onto that to do that really well and push that back into the kind of idea space that is, the way we tell stories about Australia's history. So we want to keep all those 3 things in balance, and all of those things we want to invest in them. And obviously there's responsibilities and accountabilities everywhere, but broadly, the executive will oversee and greenlight any research project. And whether these standalone separate pieces of work, they come through my team where I have, that research capacity and that history of funding and doing and being part of a research community. That was like I was aiming for exactly half an hour. I think I'm a couple of minutes early, but I also wanted to make room for kind of questions or prompts or even things that you think we should be considering when we start to design that future research program. So I'll stop there.
Thanks, Keir. Look, I think I'll open that to questions from everyone who's logged in, and just well, just speak up or put your hand up and ask a question.
I go first, Ray?
Yep, go ahead.
That was very impressive, Keir. I spent 20, 30 years in the University of Wollongong, and I thought a lot of what you said is very much focused on that tertiary environment, which is great. And you said it was, so as I said, it was very impressive, but also that outward-looking staff development aspect of conferences and that, I know, you know, that brings a lot back to the institution, that kind of engagement with the wider community. So you've got a lot on your plate there. I think at one of the meetings when we were talking to Patrick, I raised the issue of KPIs and measuring. And in other words, you say you're going to do something, put a time on it and do it and report back on it. And I think that's an important thing, because when you've got so many things going on in that research area, it's always good to say, well, what have we achieved? You know, celebrate achievements, but, you know, get jobs done and then move on. So I think that's always an important part of any strategy is completion. That's all I'd say at the moment. I've got some other questions and that, but very impressive. Good to see.
Thanks, Michael. Appreciate that.
Other questions? Well, Michael, you want to continue with what the other questions you've got?
Yeah, I think the one thing that's missing there is engagement with people like myself who are not part of the academic tertiary environment. You know, just freelancers who are going to come along and say, I want to research this, I want to research that. Because I think, having worked in the university sector for, you know, 3 decades, it's a bubble, like any of these GLAM sectors, GLAM elements. It's very much a bubble. And the archives is, I personally feel it needs to be more out there with the wider community. In the past, you know, you'd release DVDs, there'd be online material and that. So digitisation obviously offers great opportunities for engaging with the wider world, whether it's through YouTube or publications and all those sorts of things. And the DVD and all those sorts of programs are no longer online. And I've recently discussed with the Friends group that in order to see some of our classic films, and in order for them, because we had a query about curriculum development for schools, and teachers were saying they just couldn't get access to Australia's film heritage and audiovisual culture. It just wasn't online, it wasn't streaming anywhere. So all of that sort of thing is really significant. I mean, you can't go and see Ned Kelly or Sentimental Bloke or anything. Sure, there's really bad copies up on YouTube, but not the copies that have been restored and made available by the NFSA over the years. So I think the digitisation is great, but it's also about exposing that digital material to the wider world. University of Wollongong, we digitised Win4 film, we digitised magazines, but we always made sure if we digitised content, Google could find it if it was print. If we digitised film content, up it went on a server for everyone to see. Now, I know there's copyright issues with all of this stuff as well, but the imperative for any digitisation program should be accessibility and getting it out there, because that's what you're doing. It's like setby.com, when back in the 80s, you had to physically go and look for that birth, death, and marriage certificate or find a land grant or something. Now you do it all online. And I know that's an important part of this whole digitisation and digital technologies program, whether it's a VR, whether it's a digitisation via the catalogue and by online databases or bloggers and you know, I use blogger.com for all my research things. So it's about making, not just digitising, but exposing it. Now, it's great to engage with community with the tertiary sector, because that's really significant, I know from my experience. And that should lead to a lot of great opportunities where students and institutions are going to say, let's do an exhibition, let's do a publication, let's do a video, let's do a project, which will also work well for the Film and Sound Archive. But also, what are you going to do about the ordinary person out there who spends a lot of their time on Netflix or on streaming on iView or SBS or something like that? Where are those iconic Australian cultural heritage items, you know? They just need to be there so that a kid or a school teacher can just go in and say, oh, here's the first feature film, 1900, you know, then Kelly 96. Yeah, yeah. It's
maybe we can just pause there and maybe Keir could answer a bit.
No, I was enjoying that. We only have 28 more minutes. We could have, I feel like you could have kept going. Like I just want to kind of furiously agree, but also say like that's explicitly what we're doing. Like that's the commitment. I will put in the chat because I was looking at it before a meeting earlier today. The executive working with the board and working with the staff wrote the 22 to 25 strategic direction document that actually has right at the heart of it, kind of the critical part of it, is what we see as the virtuous cycle of discoverability, accessibility, and digitization. In a way, there's sort of, you know, like there's no point doing the preservation if no one can find it, and there's no point being able to find it if you can't then get access to it. Like, what's the point? But then the more people have access to it and are finding it and engaging with it, you're actually going to uncover more things that you then want to digitize because people value the institution and value that availability. So I'd encourage you to have a quick read of that because it's short. It's like 10 pages or something. It's in the chat there. The other thing that to me is completely critical is to go where people are and not expect them to know that our website is the place where that thing can be found. And so one of the things that Bronwyn Dowder, who's our head of commercial and access, is often saying is, sure, the catalogue needs to be easy to use, but if teachers and their schools all have a Canopy account, then we should publish a sentimental bloke in Canopy rather than asking them to magically know they have to come to some weird bit of the NFSA website to find that thing. So actually our shop, so shop.nfsa, which has a lot of these titles, you're even talking about, you know, Rats in the Ranks, kind of like I grew up in that area. It was like the first bit of documentary cinema that I saw as like an 11-year-old and thought, oh my God, this is the world, right? That still stick with you these years later, right? So things like that, we're moving out of this sort of hard to find, you know, get sent a DVD at your school kind of experience to a couple of dollars playing the browser, or if you already have a subscription through either ClickView or Canopy, which are the big kind of moving image distribution networks for education faculties, they've already paid. So they don't have to pay again. They just use their login and then it's there. So we're actually taking a lot of content that we used to charge for and you had to come to us, and we're putting in the places where educators are, all sorts of educators are, and making it available there. And then almost like removing it from our website and going and putting it in all the places where people already are, which to us is like, there's sort of no point. Again, our job is public value, and there's not a lot of public value in something locked in a vault that no one's allowed to see. So yeah, we're not only in furious agreement, we're also actively doing it.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, other questions?
That actually raises the question. In previous years, the archive seems to have been much more concerned with commercial concerns. That when they talked about research, they were talking about outward facing into industry. And so a lot of the availability was in terms of clips out of context and paid at a high rate. That tended then to move into the area of research that was belittled in a way that obviously has been enhanced under the new management, which is terrific. But it's still that question of the balance between commerce and research. and how you actually, who makes decisions about how much who pays for what.
Oh, are you happy to answer that a little bit, Jackie? I mean, I can speak on second hand, but Jackie's been much closer to this work than I have.
Jill, I think that's always going to be a tension. I think we do, see our role as, we have to facilitate access to the collection and we have to facilitate research. We do have that commercial imperative. I know, and you and I have spoken before, we have spoken with the Friends about that, that sort of swing towards the commercial, the shorter, that focus. I think we have swung back, and the work that Keir has spoken about is part of that swing. It doesn't mean that we are moving away from commercial access to the collection. It's just about the mix of how we do that and the pathways that are available. One thing I would flag is that we have done a review of our access fees, and so we have recently introduced a new rate card which sees most fees reduced quite significantly, and much more of a focus on just facilitating access as opposed to that high-end commercial side of it. So does that answer your question? Great, thank you.
Other questions?
But also, just like while you're thinking, who wants to put their hand up next, to echo Jackie's, but also to talk about, to use some language Patrick often uses in meetings, which is at the moment, our goal is to balance relevance, reach, and revenue, and not get seduced by revenue at the expense of being able to reach more Australians with these stories. But just reach for its own sake isn't the goal. Otherwise I guess you just like market things on Facebook or something. It's about relevance. It's about that contextual information. It's about meaning making. So tension is one word, balance I guess is another, but it's sort of a three-legged stool that we want to keep in mind, because we need to be a sustainable institution. We want the collection to be understood, but we want it available to the most people we could possibly make it available to. And that's really like keeping those things in productive tension really is the work at the moment.
Thanks. Here, other questions? Keir, I'll ask one here. You mentioned there are 3 PhD programs that you're working on. Can you tell us what they are?
You know what? I can tell you about the one that I'm the professor for, but I cannot tell you with a great deal about the other ones. I'll take the 2 on notice, but the one that I'm overseeing is his name is Alexander Robinson. He also has a kind of part-time job as the head of photo access in Canberra. And his research is on the almost, how would you describe it? You can never do it as well as the candidate themselves. It's on the physicality of the digitized film. So we often talk about digital as being kind of ones and zeros. And so we really understand the kind of film experience, like looking at nitrate in a cinema, looking at, beautiful textures and grains, through projected light. And his research is about the physicality of the digital film production food chain, and then preservation and presentation, because often when we get a kind of DCP or a digital cinema package, it's like a hard drive, like it has a physicality to it, and it has there's a kind of aesthetic to the digital that's not just ones and zeros, that is a kind of echo of film in the past. So he's looking at things like when you start with a film and you end up with a digitized film, and then you watch it on a digital projection screen, how much of that original analog object is maintained beyond the aesthetic, into the experiential, into the material, what is the impact of the digitized object, in the same way as we understand a canister in a shelf has a kind of physicality to it. What's the kind of physicality to digital film? And it's sort of, I'm not sure exactly what he hopes to find out, but neither does he really, because he's sort of 1 year into 5 years. But it's really interestingly intellectual space to inhabit. It's somewhere between the physical and the digital, and about film and about the experience of it. So all things I'm interested in, so I'm happy to be his supervisor.
I'm aware of two PhD projects that you may or may not be aware of. One is with Romain Lemaître, and another is Andrew Best. Are you aware of both of those?
I've seen them. I've seen the names written down, but I can't tell you what they're doing.
Okay. Rowan is researching. His research question is evolving, but he's researching the relation between the NFSA and the Australian character, okay, and how that's reflected in the election and vice versa. Okay. He's at university. He's at Griffith University. I'm one of his supervisors. That's how I know about that one. The other one is Andrew Best, who is also at Griffith, but is and we did a webinar with him, which is on the Friends website, about Charles Chevelle. He has started with Chevelle's first film, Moth of Moonby, and he is doing what is archivally interesting, and that is it's an incomplete film, so he's trying to remake the lost bits with new actors and getting as far back to the original scenario if it's available, or information about the original production to try to do this faithfully. So that's also a PhD project, and I'm aware that he and Charles Chevelle's grandson, Rick Carlson, will be coming in December to the archive. So you'll no doubt hear from them, because that's an ongoing project. But I'd be interested, and I think we'll all be interested to know what the other two PhD projects are that you mentioned that you don't have details of. So
Well, I think you've just covered them. That I had a list of 3 names, and Rowan I've met as well. He came in.
oh, okay.
Yeah. Sorry,
Maybe
I'm getting old. My recall isn't so great.
Other questions? Yes, Jessica, go ahead.
Hi, thanks very much, Keir. That was really fascinating. And I was just interested in whether the NFSA has had any initiatives, research initiatives around people in the industry who are living with disabilities, whether there's been any actual sort of active engagement with that sector. I mean, I'm just aware of the really fantastic work that's happening with Bus Stop Films, which is, I don't think allied to a tertiary industry at all, but I can just sort of see that there are opportunities there for, an area of the industry which is a definite, growth area, which sort of doesn't sort of necessarily perhaps fall in traditional kind of research frameworks. And I just wondered whether there's anything, whether there'd been any.
That is a fantastic prompt. Not that I'm aware of, although I do. Maybe Jackie is probably maybe slightly more across this than me, and I'll add something. Maybe if you take over, Jackie, and then I'll add something at the end.
Jessica, that's a really good question. From time to time, we are approached to partner on bids for funding. A couple of years ago, we were part of a bid that ultimately wasn't successful around, and I'm sorry, it's been a little while since but it was around people with hearing impairment and their experience of audiovisual media. That proposal wasn't successful, but we had partnered. We were happy to partner on it if it was. But apart from that, at the moment, in dedicated research projects, I'm not aware of anything else we're doing. Not that we wouldn't be open to it.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, and not like specific to the community of folk in Australia with lived experience of disability. We have been looking at projects that kind of balance the kind of tertiary sector's focus on the canon, let's say. So we're doing work with, or we're as part of a proposal, just like Jackie was talking about, that I hope gets up around queer video game production in Australia over the last 25 years, which is sort of an untold story as well. And then we're also looking at things around sustainability and First Nations-led media production and that sort of thing. So there's some of the things that get up are kind of the more obvious NFSA things, but we're trying to put our hat in the ring for things that are less obvious and try and use our weight and where it makes sense, our investment to help get those things going as well. But at the moment, what's on the slate is what you've already seen. But it's a really good prompt to think about how to better respond to that next time we're asked.
Cheers, thanks.
Other questions? Here, one of the things that that I'm aware of, and maybe others are as well, is we take the clock back about 15 years, and the NFSA had a Scholars in Residence program. And I think if you look at the annual report, the first annual report of the NFSA as a state authority, quite a few of these programs were listed. I don't know how long this whole scheme ran for. I know that Gwenda, who's logged in here now today, was one of the students that did a project. I don't know what the outcomes were. Presumably the outcomes are held by the archive in the documentation collection. And there'd be other research as well, which is there in hard copy, such as the NFSA journal, which ran for a while, which also had that sort of material. Now, how do people approach using the documentation collection? How do they actually know that these things are there? And how do they get started if they want to delve into this material?
I have to say, when I started, I didn't know about the journals. I was excited to discover them through this process, which is about surfacing even to internal staff, what our histories are. We often think maybe hubristically that we're the ones inventing the wheel, and then you find, decades of wheel invention, in your own archives, often at your fingertips.
Yep.
So one of the things we've been doing actually is making that sort of material, that documentation collection material, more available to the staff and more visible as part of our, meaning making. And we haven't got to a point yet where we have a kind of searchable library index of that material for kind of the external people, to the point that was made earlier by Michael, like you should be able to just find things, right? At the moment, you have to come to us to find things. They live on our internal systems, not our external systems. But that's something we do want to address. We can't address it yet, but we do want to address it and make it more discoverable and more easy to use. So at the moment, people almost need to know to ask, and that's obviously a barrier.
And in physical terms, where can people actually research documentation?
So in person, the access, commercial and access team, because it's sort of that balance again, to the point that Jill was making before. It's about revenue racing, but also about getting people in front of the collection. The commercial and access team facilitate access to, in-person access inside Sydney, Melbourne, and Acton. But for the documentation, it's a little less straightforward, because some things we don't even know exactly where they are. Mostly we do. Like there is a physical copy of the journal on my desk, because I was reading it before this meeting. But then some of the other things that we know exist in physical copy, we're not exactly 100% sure where, because they're in one of the boxes in the Mitchell warehouse. So there's a broader backlog project. I think we counted 25 different backlogs at the NFSA that need, working through. And so there's a rigor around which ones we do and what order we do them, to make sure that we're bringing, again, the highest potential public value. So I don't have a good answer, but I have myself been curious about it and have encountered things in different ways. I don't know. You feel free to add, Jackie, but I'm not sure there's more to add than that.
25 different backlogs. Yeah, okay. Well, I know the feeling. Other questions? Yes, Sue.
A lot of cultural institutions use volunteers, and particularly in things like backlog projects. But the NFSA has not got a strong tradition in the last couple of decades, really, of using volunteers to do some of this behind the scenes work. And I'm wondering why, and whether there is thought about doing that, because volunteers, and I worked at the NFSA and did some of this many, many years ago. Volunteers can be very good at sorting through backlog collections that you will never have staff have the staff resources to do. So I'm wondering what the NFSA's thoughts are about volunteers.
Do you want me to jump in, Keir?
Oh, I'd love that. Yes, please.
And look, I'm sorry, we weren't prepared for jet broad. We were prepared for questioning about and discussion about our research program. So
I just felt that these sort of backlog collections are, you know, you need to know what you've got to do the research. I guess that's why I raised it when Keir mentioned.
So I know that we have for a number of years been a lot more focused in our the volunteer areas, and partly that's been because, as you would know, you know, to properly sort of support a volunteer program, you need staff to manage that. And as you know, our staffing, our funding environment up until 18 months ago was extremely tight. So we haven't been very focused on this because we've been purely focused on the absolute core of just delivering that, you know, the things we must. I know, Sue, there is that logic to the fact that volunteers can help take the pressure of some of that work, but still it has to be set up. And we are open to expanding our volunteer program, and that's something that we have sort of on the long plan. Once we get through this bubble of, you know, the intensive delivery of some of the work that mostly sits in Keir's space around digital transformation, but again, it sits alongside some work we're doing on internships, traineeships. We want to be a lot more kind of systematic and deliberate about the way we're approaching that. So my answer is yes, we're keen to do that, but in a very sort of well thought out way.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah.
Thanks, Jackie. I feel like that sums up almost everything we're doing at the moment. We're keen to do it, but we want to do it in a well thought out way. You know, I think we've lost.
Do you have
I don't know where Ray is. Yes.
Do you have any sense of reviving the scholars in residence program? I was actually in the first intake for that.
Oh, cool.
And it moved across from people from universities, from workplace, from the ABC, and quite independent, so on. And it meant that there was an engagement with questions that were outside the framework that normally operates within blue sky research that comes in from the outside really begins to use the collection in fascinating ways and opens it up for more possibilities, for more engagement of more people. I'm just wondering, I mean, you talk about traineeships and so on, internship, but for like, you know, a 6-week program for independent researchers to know that they have the resources of the institution behind them, and they've got the availability of be able to question and ask about where material is, what else might be there, and so on. That actually opens up the collection in ways that are very, very useful, I think.
So you're absolutely right, and you kind of couched in the reason why we haven't gone hard at this yet, which is a research residency program is only effective if we can resource it properly, not financially, but properly in terms of making material available and answering questions and being like a proper partner. And what we saw once we did the audit of our kind of existing research commitments was, in essence, we'd said yes to too many things. And so we needed to scale back the effort, focus the effort to then expand into the right places. And one of the things we're doing at the moment, and I come at this from both sides. I've been an artist in residence at the State Library of Queensland in my kind of past life. So I know what the draw I took on that institution for me to have a residency there. You know, like they didn't pay very much, but they gave a lot. And so we can, at the moment, we can afford to run a scholars program, but we can't resource it so that it's really successful for those scholars. And so that's the bit of work we want to do at the moment, now that we've right-sized our research engagement and we're in this very much in a kind of delivery mindset at the moment, is to get to a point we can then open that back up with confidence and say, yes, we can support you, so that the research outputs are valuable to you and to the institution and to the public. So we're likely going to do a few targeted EOI-based activities where we're saying the research topics that are available because we know we can fund them and resource them. And so we're doing this pre-work to see what's actually fundable and actually resourceable. And then that I hope, like not I hope, we hope, this is very much the intention of the executive and Patrick in particular, who'd love to see, he's talked a lot about a kind of historian and residence program he'd like to see, is it's like a stepping stone. Almost we want to prove to ourselves that we can be the right place for people to do work that's successful. And that's why it's taken a little bit of time. I guess I started about 18 months ago, and it was one of the things I, proposed in my early months was I'd really like to invest in a research program here. And Patrick's view at the time, which turns out completely right, was we don't even know what we're already committed to. So how can we design a future? So we had to do the audit, we had to do the prioritization, we had to do the clarity for staff, we had to write the strategy, and now we're getting into commissioning, and then we'll open the door to interested parties. So it is, it's really methodical, but I think it'll lead to something that's more sustainable. I often say innovation is best done slowly and methodically and really transparently. So this is what we're trying. I have a meeting that starts in 3 minutes.
Okay.
So I might, if everyone's okay, we might just pause there.
Yes, well, I don't know where Ray is, but thank you very much, Keir, on behalf of the Friends for doing this for us, because we're all very keen on supporting the NFSA, of course, and on knowing what the research strategy and activities are. I think the one thing I would add is it would be nice in future perhaps to have a couple of events for Friends where some of the research you're doing and outcomes can be shared in a person face-to-face situation. So we might talk to you about that later. But in the meantime, thank you very much for putting the time into this. We really appreciate it, and we hope it was worthwhile for you too. Thank you.
It's fantastic. No, I appreciate that. Thank you, Sue. That's very kind.
Thank you. It's really interesting.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye.